Yeah, like I said, my name's Ferre. I've got Stephen Swenson here on the line with us, and this is the free webinar that we do about tax sales, about tax sale investing, and we're happy that you could join us. We enjoy conducting these webinars, and we hope that you're able to get a lot from it. For all the people that we've got here, we're not sure if this is your first experience with this. If we were to guess, we would say you've probably seen our free materials online before, because we've got a ton of it out there, and we try to do the same thing. We've been offering training like that for a long time.
Yeah, and really kind of the goal of this training is to help you guys understand exactly what is tax lien and deed investing, and also really how you guys can get started.
Yeah, I think that there's some tremendous opportunities out there with tax sales, and unfortunately, there's also a lot of confusion about tax sales, about how it works, about how you can invest. And so we want to see if we can answer some of those questions and clear that up somewhat. But first, we should probably tell you a little bit about who we are. We started with tax sales back around 2000. Steve and I are cousins, so we kind of grew up with each other, and we got involved with tax liens about the same time. Self-taught. You know, at the time when we started, we sought out every bit of training that we could find, but the reality of it was it didn't work. You know, first off, the training was mostly based on pre-internet tax sale investing, and about the time we were starting was when the internet was becoming a major part of counties and their websites. So that changed. It basically meant that the old styles, old things that they talked about were not applicable, and none of that was really that good anyway. The only way that we really learned how to do it eventually was just by attending sales and by actually in bidding, trying to buy different investments in different places and reading state laws.
Yeah, and then in 2007, we ended up creating a company that ended up having an A+ rating with the BBB for over 10 years. And essentially what we did is we provided training mostly to the seminar companies. So we had information out there, free information, but 99% of what we did was really creating programs for large seminar companies and fulfilling on all of their students. And so we did that for about a decade, and then starting this year, we really decided that we wanted to kind of quit working with the seminar companies and really offer our training directly to investors online.
Yeah, in fact, if you've ever been to a real estate seminar or any kind of a seminar like that, then you probably know how they do things. The training they offer is typically very expensive, and part of the reason why it's expensive is because it costs so much money to put on those big events, and you also have a lot of people that are involved with it. So essentially this slide right here just kind of shows what we did. We used to private label our training to the seminar companies. We'd basically provide it to them, let them put whatever logo they wanted on it, and then ultimately sell it. And we did that for a long time, but ultimately what we wanted to do, I think, and what we've always enjoyed doing is the teaching side of it. And we'd never felt like, well, most of the people that want to invest in tax sales, they're in the financial position where they need it to work. They want to use it as a way to either create more income for themselves, maybe as a way to create some kind of retirement. Either way, it's rarely the rich, wealthy people that are looking to get involved, even though that would be a good group to do it. So we sought out to reduce the price of the training overall, and so by cutting out that middleman, we were literally able to drop it about 80 to 90%. So in doing so, we're able to teach a much larger group of people. It's basically something that I think just about anybody can afford. We like to do a couple things when we do these trainings. One is we like to show a lot of examples. These are a couple of examples here coming up in California this week. These are tax deeds, meaning these are properties that are scheduled for auction beginning on the 15th, And the opening bid you see there, the one on the left is 38,000, the one on the right is 42,000, and both of those homes have an estimated value in excess of $400,000. So you're looking at an opening bid to value ratio of about 10%. That is a pretty good deal. As we find those are the kind that we look for.
Yeah, and with both of these properties, that opening bid starts about 10%, but really with either one of these properties, you could probably bid anywhere between 10 to 50% and still make an incredible profit. I mean, even if you went all the way up to 40 or 50%, you could still make over $200,000 by looking at one of these individual properties or bidding at these properties at the online auction. And so that's one thing, and we'll talk about it later as we get into the training, that's changed between now and when me and Shade first got started, is really the ability to purchase tax liens or purchase tax deeds online.
Yeah, in fact, it used to be a very tedious process. When we first learned about tax liens and tax deeds, the reality of it was that it was so limited by the fact that you had to be there for so many different things that it would be a difficult investment strategy to do if you weren't local to the area. Now, that has all changed, really. The internet has kind of made everything closer, and it has really opened up the floodgate of opportunity for tax liens and tax deeds, because counties no longer have to rely on local people coming in to make these investments. They can rely on everybody else. So it has been a really good thing for tax liens and deeds, and yet it's still in its infancy. It's still right in the process here where it's changing. I mean, there are still counties that are, they're getting their websites set up. There are new online auctions that are starting to take place. 20 years from now, I'm sure we'll look back at this time and realize it was still in a very transformative stage.
Yeah, I mean, so much has changed with tax lien and deed investing over the last 100 years, but so much has stayed the same. I mean, what is done 15, 20 years ago that may take days worth of research can literally be done in a couple of hours worth of online research. And so what that's done for us as investors, it's made it a lot easier. When we first got started, if you wanted to purchase over-the-counter tax liens in Arizona, you essentially went down to Arizona. First, you asked for a list. They sent you a list. You had to pay for it. Then you had to go down to the county courthouse and go through the Rolodex and all of the cards and find the individual property records to do individual research. Now, with a matter of 20 seconds, you can type in that parcel number and pull up all the property records and do a pretty good evaluation in just a matter of minutes. And so much has changed, but so much has stayed the same. And really, what our goal is if there is any changes, we're going to constantly let our investors, our members know about it, so that they're always staying ahead of the curve.
Yeah. Now, by the way, for everybody here, you're welcome to ask questions in either the question section or the chat section. We always love to get questions, and we'll do whatever we can to answer them. Despite all of this and the way things have changed, tax liens and deeds are still one of the most misunderstood investments. And there are a couple of different reasons for that, I think. First off, the term tax lien, it's been a buzzword with investors for a long time. And there are some reasons for that. If you remember, maybe more than a decade ago, different infomercials, late night infomercials that would be on TV that would talk about tax liens, and they would say, that you could get homes, for pennies on the dollar, and they really created this idea that you could use tax liens to buy homes for a few $100s they had on the infomercial. I remember. I don't know if anybody else here remembers that, but I remember.
Yeah, I mean,
really well.
Really, 5 or 10 years ago, you couldn't watch TV in the evening without coming across a John Beck or somebody like that infomercial that was talking about tax lien and deed investing, but not really explaining it very well. Really, that was more of a lead generation than an actual training program. And so, what we want to do is be able to help you actually go out there and start investing in real tax liens or tax deeds.
Yeah, the idea of getting homes for pennies on the dollar, that was half true. I think every good lie, is one that has partial truth in it. The actual truth, and the reason why tax liens have always been appealing, is because banks and investment firms have been investing in tax liens for decades. I mean, a long time. In fact, I don't know exactly when they started. I know that it's been longer than 20 or 30 years, but the exact time I'm not actually even sure of. It's something they've been doing a long time because it's a safe investment that brings in a great rate of return. And so, to really understand how tax sales work in general, there are a couple of fundamental things that you need to understand. And if you understand these things, the rest of tax sale investing will make much more sense. It's one of those things, it's kind of like math where you're building on building blocks. You need to understand certain concepts before other concepts will make sense to you. And so the first of this would be understanding taxation. We're going to talk about that in a second. Federal law versus state law, how property taxes are issued. We're going to talk about property deeds just for a second, how they work, essentially county government structure, and how property liens work. Those are all some of the fundamentals there for understanding tax sales. And if you want, go ahead and explain the difference, Steve, to them, the difference between federal laws and state laws and why it's even important.
Well, as far as the federal law, federal laws and kind of their association are really, as far as the method of that is really to collect income tax and collect Social Security. When we're talking about tax sale investment, the tax sales aren't written on a federal level. They're always going to be written on a state level. In fact, some states give some of that flexibility to the counties. So when we're talking about the federal laws, those are going to have to do with income tax and Social Security. But when we're talking about the state laws are going to, some states will have income tax and property taxation. But what they do is the states really set the boundaries for the individual counties as far as their tax sales are concerned. So, for example, a state like Arizona will dictate that the tax lien sales are held in the month of February. So in the month of February, all of the tax lien sales will be held. Maybe it's on the 1st and maybe it's on the 21st. It really doesn't matter, but they have to follow within those guides. And so an understanding how the state structures the tax sale system, all of the tax lien laws or tax deed laws are going to be written on a state level. So once you understand that state law, then you're going to understand exactly how the state allows the counties to dictate their tax sale. Some may be given more freedom where they can hold the auction whenever they need. Other counties or other states are going to be more specific with their laws as far as how the tax sales take place.
In fact, taxation in general is it's a big deal. It doesn't seem like a big deal to us because we're so used to being taxed, but when the laws were initially established to allow taxation, it was a huge deal, and this is also part of the reason why there's always been so much confusion about tax sale investing, why it's never been something that was quite so clear, why it's easy to misunderstand, and that's because the property tax enforcement methods are all based on state laws, and every state's got its own set of laws. So, you literally have 50 different sets of laws controlling, how property taxes are enforced. When Steve and I started, that was part of the challenge, was trying to figure out, between those 50 different states, how exactly the system worked, and if we could try to put it together in a way that would make sense. And so, that was when we came up with the program, and really a lot of that is, the result of that is essentially a lot of what you see today. Now, we talked about property taxes, how they're important just to understand in general, if you're going to do tax sales. Oh, and by the way, one of the questions we got a minute ago was just about how much money, somebody was asking, could they start with? They were wondering, heard that they could start with as little as $300, and the first tax lien I bought was $67. You don't have to start big. In fact, starting small is something we've always encouraged people to do because it's easier if you can get your feet wet. It's easier to do if you can make a small investment and see how the process works. Go through that process, because the next time you do it, it's going to be that much easier to do.
Yeah, in fact, we had one of our members today well, not today, but over the last week or so, that has purchased 3 or 4 tax liens in Florida on great single-family homes for $300 to $400. Now, that takes a lot of research to find those individual properties, but she was able to purchase great tax lien certificates directly online just by doing some basic due diligence.
Yeah. With property taxes, probably something that everybody here is somewhat familiar with. You get a property tax bill, in the mail, and you may know certain things about your property tax bill. Others, may be completely confused and just know that there's an amount there and kind of what they have to pay. The reality is the property tax bill that you get is a specific amount, and it's going to be based on 2 different factors. The first is the assessed value of your home. So everybody's paying their fair share. What they're paying is going to be dependent on the value of their property. But the other number that they use to determine that is the property tax rate for that year. Okay, and the property tax rate, which generally is between 0.5% to 2.5%, depending on where you live. The way that they determine what that is based on the budget expectation they have for property taxes. So, they figure out how much money they need to raise with the property taxes, and that's how they set that amount. So, essentially, what it begins to tell you is that, first off, it's important for them to collect the property taxes. The other side of taxation is the enforcement of taxation, because if you didn't have a good enforcement system in place, then eventually nobody would pay anything. And that's really what these systems are all about. They're simply enforcement systems, to make sure that property taxes are paid ultimately. And so everything they do is structured around getting property taxes paid. But if you pay your property taxes, basically what's happening is you're paying money to the county, and the county is using those funds to pay for a number of services that are being offered. Education is a huge one. Sometimes that can take up most of the money in counties, but you also have police and fire departments. You have a huge list of things that the county provides that are done through property taxes. So if somebody doesn't pay their property taxes, it obviously creates a problem. They need a good way of enforcing that. And between the 50 states, what it really comes down to is there are 3 property tax enforcement systems that are in use. There's a tax lien system, what we call a tax deed system, and a redemption deed system, meaning that every state in the country will use at least one of these. Okay, there's a couple of states that use more than one. They're a little bit confusing, but for the most part, every state will use one of these 3. So, if we're looking at tax liens, let's talk for a second just about how it works, how the mechanics of it work, and some of the fundamentals here. First off, what is a lien? A lien is a claim that gives the right to keep possession of a property belonging to another person until the debt owed by that person is discharged. It's a type of claim. They can place it against property, and it's usually because you owe some kind of delinquent amount. So, for instance, if you had construction work done on a property, there is a mechanics lien. Maybe you've heard of mechanics liens before. The subcontractor could go down and put a lien on the property, and what would happen? Well, before you would have the ability to close on that home, in fact, you would go to close on that home once you were finished, building it, and you wouldn't be able to do so. And that would be because it had this lien on the property. You see, one of the attributes of a lien is that it prevents the transfer of ownership. So you cannot sell the property until the lien is removed from the property. That's a big factor. The other side of it is the liens, tax liens are what are called the first position lien, meaning that they take priority or precedence over anything else. They're property taxes, and the government wants to make sure that they get theirs first. And the only way to do that is to make it a first priority lien.
Yeah, and the advantage of having that first priority lien is that something like a mortgage, in 99% of the cases, something like a mortgage, a judgment, something that's attached to the property, and we'll talk about it here in a minute, will actually be, will no longer be attached to the property if you go through a tax lien foreclosure.
Yeah, which is it's insane. It blew me away the first time that I learned this, but yeah, a tax lien can actually be used to foreclose on a property and extinguish a mortgage. Basically, I mean, the mortgage may still exist, the loan still exists between the borrower, and the lender, but the property no longer stands as collateral, for that. Um, the way that liens work is the county creates a lien and places it against the property. Now, keep in mind always that the county's real objective here is just to collect what's owed in delinquent taxes. So the amount of the lien will be for what's owed, plus whatever penalties and fees there are. And like we said, that's going to prevent the owner from being able to sell the property, could lead to foreclosure. That's the other part of liens, is that if they're not taken care of within a set period of time, known as a redemption period, then the lien can then be used to execute foreclosure. So that's an important fact here. And obviously, the later you are paying your taxes, the more you have to pay, the more the penalties and fees add up. Now, those penalties and fees, you'll see how they benefit the investor. Okay, so imagine the county places this lien against a property. Ultimately, what they really want is just to collect that money, and the easiest way for them to do that is to hold a public tax sale where those liens can be sold to investors. Now, investors come to buy these liens, and obviously they have to be appealing to investors. They have to offer tremendous upside, or nobody would come to invest in them. So the way that states have this set up are any states that use a tax lien system pay out a set interest rate return to investors that buy liens there, and that interest rate return ranges from about 10 to 24%, roughly. It's about right.
Yeah, generally.
Yeah, it's a kind of return that it outdoes most of your your standard investments. So essentially, you go to the auction, you can buy one of these liens. It'll be set for that amount that was owed. So maybe you buy it for $1,000, and you buy it at, let's say you get it at the maximum interest rate return, 18%, and it has a 2-year redemption period. Okay. At that time, two things happen on that day. The first is the lien begins accruing interest immediately. Okay, from the time that it's purchased, it is accruing interest, and if you're earning 18% annually, that means it's accruing at a rate of 1.5% per month. So every month, it's adding on another 1.5%. The second thing is that redemption period begins, and so from the date of that sale, the redemption period would be 2 years from that. So it basically begins to wind down. Now, during that time period, the property owner has the choice to either pay or not pay their property taxes. A lot of that really just comes down to, well, everybody can be late with their property taxes sometimes. The vast majority of the time, what do people do? They pay it off. They just pay their property taxes a little bit late. Not really a big deal, but sometimes not, and the county has to have a way of pursuing that. So once you bought that lien, there's really only two things that can happen. Okay, and they're both based on what the property owner does. Either they pay the county or they don't pay the county. If they pay the county, the lien is removed and a check is mailed out to you for your initial investment plus the interest rate that's been earned up to that point. So if you had it for 6 months and it was at that 18%, you would basically earn half of that, 9%. So you get the $1,000 plus 9%, which would be $90. So you get a check in the mail for $1,090. If you had that for 2 years, then it would be 36% total, which would be $1,360. So that amount is basically mailed out to you, and the other side of that is if they don't pay. And if they don't pay, well, that's where you can use the lien to foreclose on the property, or at least to initiate that foreclosure process, which in that process, it will either be foreclosed on or it will be paid off. It's one or the other. That's what essentially forces something to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what makes tax lien investing so exciting, is that when you're talking about earning an interest rate return, I've had family members that have invested huge huge amounts of money into the stock market and lost, even if it was a safe stocks, mutual funds had lost that over the last 10 years. When you're investing in tax lien certificates, you're either going to make your money plus your interest rate return, or you're going to have the opportunity to acquire the property. It's really just, it's one of the best investment strategies that I've ever seen as far as guaranteeing an interest rate return. You're not hoping to earn 5%. You're not hoping to earn 10%, whatever that interest rate is. That interest rate is pretty much guaranteed. You're earning that on a monthly basis, and once the property owner pays the county, you're going to get cut a check. If they don't pay the county, then essentially you're going to go through the foreclosure proceedings to acquire the property.
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking for a legitimate investment, it doesn't get any more legitimate than this. Because you are buying it. This is state law, essentially. It's based on state law. It's the county that's issuing things. It's not the kind of thing that that you're going to get ripped off on. That's just not how it works. Like Steve said, it's if you buy that lien, it is you're essentially guaranteed to either that interest rate return or the or the property, essentially. So if the property owner pays, then you end up getting that check in the mail. If they don't, then what happens is you use that lien to initiate the foreclosure process. And if you've ever looked at foreclosure, maybe some of you have, maybe some of you haven't before, it's slightly different from state to state, but at the same time, it's pretty similar. It's similar in a lot of ways everywhere. And that is the first part of that process is once you initiate it, notices are sent out, and they're sent out to any party that has a financial interest in the property. So that would include at this point the property owner, but it would also include a lender. If there's a lender that's involved, then definitely a lender would receive that notice. Now, for the lender receiving it, that might be the first time that they ever know anything about delinquent property taxes. So what do you think the lender's going to do if they find out? They're going to pay it.
And most times they're going to pay it.
Yeah, every time, they'll pay it if they have to. They'll do whatever they need to do to protect their position, and their investment. Why will they do that? Well, because they know full well that if they don't pay it, they will lose that property. That's the reality of how it works. Once those notices go out, they're basically going to say that there is, that this amount of money has to be paid by this date, or, this property will be foreclosed on. And, you've got that time period there to pay it off. So, really, most of the laws regarding foreclosure are about making sure that the property owners are notified. But outside of that, all of foreclosure is really quite similar. So, yeah, if you're sitting there after 2 years and that lien still hasn't been redeemed, then you can start the foreclosure process. Now, that may just end up leading to it redeeming. Oftentimes, that would be the case. But it's going to force something to happen either way. So, either redeems or you'll be able to foreclose on the property. Now, let's say let's say that you're able to foreclose on the property. One of the things that the county is going to require when you go to foreclose on that property is that the property taxes are current. Okay, so well, just like the lien that you have against the property prevents the transfer of ownership, if there are any other delinquent taxes there, they're going to prevent the transfer of ownership as well. Now, if you bought a lien, you've already paid part of those property taxes. And so, in other words, if before they would actually transfer ownership over to you, they would just want to make sure that that was current. And so maybe you have to pay another $1,000 in order to get the property, let's say. But what that does when you do that is if there are other lien holders. So, for instance, if there was a sale the following year and for whatever reason you didn't buy that lien, which the county will often offer to you, they sold it to somebody else. When you went to foreclose on that property and paid off that amount, they would use that to pay off that other lien holder. So it adds to the overall security of the investment. One way or another, the investors get paid off.
Yeah, so if you own a tax lien and somebody else owns a tax lien as well, another investor that's before you, and they end up foreclosing, you're not going to lose your money. Your money's essentially going to be paid off with your interest rate return, so that tax lien holder that's before you or that had the previous year has the ability to foreclose and essentially pay you off.
Yeah. We actually had a really good question here, a minute ago. The question about tax liens. The individual was concerned about the competitive bidding, and if they would be able to get that, because obviously if it's an auction, then they use, competitive bidding to decide who will win. But you don't have to go through that. You see, if the county is not able to sell all of the liens that they have available, okay, so for whatever reason, if they have liens left over, and that could be for a number of reasons, it could be because they have a ton of liens and they don't get a lot of investors there. It could be because the sale fell through. You really never know what it is. But any of those liens that are left over, the county puts back on their books. Now, remember we talked about that redemption period beginning on the date of the sale. Well, that begins whether the tax lien sells or not. So the tax liens go back, they sit on the books with the county, but that time period is still ticking away. As an investor, you can get a list of those liens that the county is now holding on to, and you can buy them direct, meaning you can just basically pay to purchase the lien. And one of the advantages of doing so is that you automatically earn the maximum interest rate return, and you also will have some of that time taken off of the redemption period. So if you bought it 6 months after the sale and it's a 2-year redemption period, you only have a year and a half left. In some cases, there are over-the-counter liens that are available that have been sitting on the books for a long time, which can speed up the process there if you want some kind of, if you want something to happen with the investment sooner, if you don't want to wait that long.
Yeah, and when it comes to bidding at an auction, what the percentage you bid down to is going to completely depend on the auction. Some auctions it just happens to have more competition, and the next time they won't. So you can predict to a degree what the auction turnout would be based off of the previous auction, but it could be completely different. So you'll find auctions where maybe it's a little bit more competitive and you're not able to win the tax liens at the interest rates you want, but you'll find other tax lien auctions that are maybe a little bit less competitive and that you're able to get the interest rate at a double-digit return or whatever. So maybe it starts at 18%, but if you can get a quality property for 10% or 12%, you're still looking at an incredible investment even if you had to bid down that interest rate. And so what we always talk to our members about is setting parameters before they actually bid. So they know they're going to take liens down to whatever percentage that be. If that's 12% or if that's 8% or whatever it is, depending on the property, they're essentially willing to bid that down. And if they aren't able to get the property at the interest rate they want, then essentially they're able to let the property go because they could purchase it, like Shade said, over the counter. They could try another auction. I mean, literally, there's auctions going on every single month for tax lien certificates. So if you don't have you don't get your investment that month, then you can look at other auctions to be able to do that.
Interesting. We just had a comment from somebody that said, I bought Florida tax lien over the counter 2 years ago. I haven't received any news from the county. What should I do? Florida is a great place for tax sale investing, and a big part of that is the way that their state laws are written. They tend to favor investors a bit, and the counties have really been good about making the process simple. But in Florida, they're one of those few states that uses more than one system. Okay, they use a tax lien system and they use a tax deed system. Now, the way that they're able to do that is they sell tax liens, and they have a 2-year redemption period attached to them in general. And what will usually happen, though, is in maybe another state, if you were to wait out that redemption period and it didn't pay, then you could begin to foreclose on the property. In Florida, you can initiate foreclosure, but what the county will essentially do is they will schedule that property for their tax deed sale. Okay, so they'll sell the property as a tax deed at auction, and they'll have the opening bid amount begin at the minimum of what's owed. So at that point, if the property gets bids and goes up, then they will use that money to pay off the lien holders, and any excess beyond what's owed is just basically sits on the books until the previous owner is able to pick it up. But if you've got a lien, that you purchased, a couple of years ago, then there's a good chance that it's eligible now, to for the foreclosure process. I mean, ultimately, what you want to have happen is some kind of a result. You want to either get a check in the mail or you want to get foreclosure rights. So, you can begin that by initiating that process there of foreclosing.
Yeah, and what makes Florida so nice is essentially the foreclosure is going to be handled by the county. So you're not going to have to try to find an attorney or somebody like that to do the tax lien foreclosure for you. You're essentially going to be able to contact the county, go on to usually most of them are done through a website, Tax Deed Express or one of the other websites, fill out the deed application, and they'll essentially put that property up for auction. Now, you will have to pay off any delinquent taxes, so before you go through the deed foreclosure, you'll just want to research the additional taxes to see how many total taxes, how many total years or back taxes are on that particular property. But, once you've paid that off, essentially you're going to be earning 18% off of all of that money until the property forecloses. And so if it takes, 3 months, 6 months to foreclose, you're going to be making 18%. So let's say, you buy the tax lien that this student is talking about, let's say it's $1,000, and there's 2 other tax liens on the property, you'd essentially pay those tax liens off, but you're going to be earning an interest rate return off of that, and then that property will go up to tax sale. So, if the overall tax lien and tax liens, if you've added that up and it exceeds the property value and it looks like a good property, then going through that tax lien foreclosure is just going to ensure that you get paid back, 3 to 6 months. In fact, we have investors for years that have only focused on those older type of tax liens so that they can start the foreclosure process immediately. In fact, that's kind of the whole attitude or idea behind bank tax liens that we talk about, these secondary tax liens, is that the investor is foreclosing on those tax liens immediately so that they're going to make their money back in 6 months, 8 months, and essentially take that money and reinvest into more tax liens. And so if you have a tax lien that you've purchased and that's 2 years past the redemption period, then definitely doing some research on that individual tax lien, seeing how many other tax liens are on that property, and if it makes sense foreclosing on it, is going to help you either one, get your money back, either through the property owner paying that tax lien back. Number 2, the property goes to auction and sells you, and then essentially at that point, the deed buyer, the person that buys the property at auction, will pay you back your money and your interest plus 18% off the total investment. Or, third, if nobody bids on it at auction, then at that point you'd acquire the property. So there's 3 scenarios. In each scenario, you're going to either make your money back plus an interest rate return, or you're going to acquire the property. And what makes Florida unique is that once you do the foreclosure, let's say, we had that question earlier about, what if the interest rate is bid down? Well, when you go to foreclose on the tax lien, you're going to make 18%. So even if you bidded that down to 9%, when you do the foreclosure, it's going to make it 18%. And any of the other tax liens that you purchase to foreclose on the property will be paid at an 18% interest rate as well. So when you go to foreclose, you're essentially within 6 months, you're either going to make 18% off your total investment, or you're going to acquire the property. So if you're looking to get your money back, in a shorter period of time so that you can reinvest that money and in a way kind of start earning compound interest, then foreclosing on those type of tax lien certificates are only going to be a benefit to you, because you're either going to be paid back, acquire the property, and then at that point you're going to have more funds to invest into new tax lien certificates or tax deeds or whatever your goal is.
Yeah, in fact, in Florida, once you pay that off, you're essentially like the opening bid. That's what you are, as the opening
exactly.
bid. So, if there are more bids, then it can go to the highest bidder. But if there are no bids, which actually happens much more often than you would think, that it ends up going to the lien holder. So, yeah, it's a fantastic system.
Yeah, and one question we have a lot, and that's the reason we put up these 2 examples here, is it possible to acquire property through tax lien certificates? And nationwide, if we're to take all the tax liens that are sold in every state, about 95% of them will redeem. So, 95% of the time, you're going to make back your money, your interest rate return. Now, there's things you can do within tax investing to increase that percentage, but overall, that's going to be about 5%. The two properties that we have listed here are two tax liens or tax lien certificate investors that foreclosed on these properties and were able to acquire these properties. So you can see that these were just, essentially foreclosed on. The deed was issued just last week. So each one of these properties, we're looking at the first one has an assessed value of $174,000, has a Zillow value of $259,000. And one thing that you'll see common is that the assessed value is usually going to be a little bit different than the market value. But the assessed value will give us a good indication of this property's value. We can see the total delinquent tax lien was about $7,000 on one property and about $16,000 on the other property. But each one of these properties were acquired by purchasing the tax lien certificate at the auction. And the reason we bring up Colorado is because Colorado tax lien sales are happening right now. Or over the next month or 2 months or so. But each one of these properties were acquired through purchasing a tax lien certificate. So these are the 5%. But if you are able to acquire a property, and it's just a matter of time, if you're purchasing multiple tax lien certificates every year, that you acquire one of these properties. At that point, you've hit a home run. That's where you can actually acquire pennies on the dollar. The idea with those infomercials was that every tax lien certificate, you're going to get a property for pennies on the dollar. No, 9 out of 10 times that you're going to make your money back. But when you do acquire a property, as you can see in each one of these examples, you're getting an incredible property for, 5% of its market value.
Yeah, in fact, it amazes me. I mean, even these deals, I'm sure that for most of the people that are here, they're thinking to themselves, if I could, if I had the chance to buy that house for $8,000 or for $16,000, I would, absolutely sign me up. And that's really the kind of opportunities that the tax liens present. But like Steve said, the primary reason that you invest into tax liens is not necessarily to acquire property, it's to earn the high interest rate return. It's because they're such a secure investment, and they are so secure because that lien is secured by the entire property. Okay, so if you buy, pay $1,000 for a lien, it's secured by a $100,000 property. And that's where the security lies. It's because, it's still a form of real estate investing. It still uses real estate as the medium, which secures the investment. So if you are interested in property, if that's what your goal is, you want property, then we would turn you another direction here initially. Now, like Steve said, with liens, if you buy enough liens, you're going to acquire property. It'll happen. But if property is your goal from the beginning, okay, so if you just say, hey, I want to just buy a property that I can turn around and sell or whatever it is, then
I want to be a real estate investor, essentially.
Yeah, then we would point you towards tax deeds, which is the second system that we have listed here. The tax deed system is used in a lot of states, roughly about a third of them, and the tax deed system is a little bit different. Rather than the county creating a lien against the property every year, what the county does is they just begin a redemption period. So basically state laws will set a redemption period. It might be 4 years, it might be 5 years. However, they'll wait out that time period. And at the end of that time period, the primary difference is the county has the power to foreclose on it. So, at the end of that time period, if they haven't paid their delinquent taxes, then the county will go through the process of sending out the foreclosure notices, and they will then foreclose on the property. Now, again, they don't want property. That's not what they want at all. They simply want the delinquent taxes that are owed. But they'll foreclose on the property to get that if they need to. So the opening bid amount that they will have on these tax deeds is the total amount that's owed for delinquent taxes. So if there was a 4-year redemption period, it would be 4 years worth of delinquent taxes plus penalties and fees. So, if you figure that taxes... No, go ahead.
Just one thing to note is when you're looking at that tax deed, we can see that penalty there in the example of $390. Most of the counties are going to have some type of interest rate penalty that's going to be involved with the delinquent taxes. So even though, in a tax deed state, they're not issuing liens to individual investors or to the general public. That property still may be earning a penalty or an interest rate against it. And so as those can pile up over, for example, like here in Utah, it's a 5-year redemption period, or there's a 5-year period. So if I'm delinquent in 2016, then in 2021 that property would be ready for tax deed foreclosure. It could be sold to the tax deed sale. There's essentially going to be penalties and interest that's going to be applied to me during that entire 5-year period. So that opening bid amount, those penalties are going to increase not just the back taxes amount, but also the penalty amount. So when the property owner goes to pay that back, if they try to avoid having their property come up for the tax deed auction, then they're going to have to pay not only the back taxes, but that penalties, which, over a period of 4 or 5 years, if it's 10% or 12% or whatever the state has decided, that's going to be into some additional money, as well. So we can see here, even in this example, there's $900 worth of taxes, but there's $400 worth of penalties. So as far as the tax deed, in looking at that individual county government, with that starting bid amount, that could vary depending on how long the state has done it. But generally, with that opening bid amount, is usually going to be around 5, 10, maybe in a real, if there was quite a bit of taxes, 15% of that opening bid amount.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, we actually had another, good question. It was just somebody that was asking. I think they wanted to just kind of verify what they're saying. So, if I buy a tax lien for $1,000, I can never lose the $1,000. I can only basically make, I can only make money on the interest. I think what they're saying though is essentially, yes, if you buy a tax lien for $1,000, that $1,000, the investment is essentially all but guaranteed. Okay, and we say all but guaranteed because, if it doesn't redeem, then you still have to go through the foreclosure process and that. But at some point there, it will redeem. But essentially, yeah, there is really no scenario where you don't get your money back.
Really the only case would be is if you're purchasing tax liens on junk property, and that's something we talk about with our members on our weekly webinar almost every single week, is that as long as you're not investing in tax and certificates on properties that don't have value and don't have use, then your investment is protected. So as long as you do the research, and we talk about this in some of our trainings about the additional tax liens, but as long as you've done your research, you're going to have the most solid investment that's really available out there based off of that research. So if you were to purchase a $1,000 tax certificate on a $1,000 piece of land or a building lot that has no value or no use, then that would essentially, you could lose your money because you're buying a tax lien on a property that doesn't have value. But if you're buying a $1,000 tax lien on a $50,000 home or a $40,000 building lot or something like that, well, then that property has value. So either you're going to pay back your interest rate return, or you're going to acquire the property. The only reason, the reason why a property owner might not pay back one of those type of properties if it is a junk property. If it's some type of junk property, then essentially the owner doesn't want to hold on to it anymore. So as long as you've done your research and you know the property's value, the property has use, then your investment is protected because you're either going to make back the interest or you're going to acquire the property. And if you do acquire the property, it's hitting a home run because you've purchased it or you've acquired it for 5, 10, 15, 20% of its market value.
Yeah, ultimately the question you're kind of asking yourself when you're looking at the potential, investments is for the amount of the lien. So, if it's $1,000, for my $1,000 here, what is securing that? What's the, does the property have use and what is the value? And that's where you determine. And most of the time you're going to see that number is offset quite a bit, like a $1,000 tax lien versus a $60,000 or $100,000 property. Which obviously, your $1,000 is very secure. There's not going to be any situation there where you're not going to, you're not going to come out of it way ahead. So, and yeah, like you said with the bad properties, the biggest problem with junk land is that you could end up owning it. that's kind of like what your option is if nobody pays off the delinquent taxes, then you foreclose on the property. But if it's a junk property and doesn't have any value, then what's the point of foreclosing on it? If you can't sell it. So, that's really the only risk that I would say there. Um, Oh, and also, one of the questions here is, if I get the property and do not want the property, how much in lawyer fees am I looking at? And that's actually a really good question. So when you get the property deed, like a tax deed here, you're getting full ownership of the property. Okay, the property is yours, and it's essentially free and clear of encumbrances. Okay, because that foreclosure process wipes out any kind of claim to the property. Okay. Now, if you wanted to turn around and sell that property, I mean, you could begin renting it out immediately if you wanted. If you wanted to sell the property, then what you would need to do, and this gets into to property deeds a little bit. If you've ever sold your house before, and bought a house, the transfer there is done warranty deed. And it's called a warranty deed because there's an implied warranty there that there's nothing wrong, there's no money owed or anything like that. When the county forecloses on the property due to delinquent taxes and they create a new deed, they create a tax deed, which is kind of like a quitclaim deed. Okay, it's simply the easiest deed for them to create, but it doesn't necessarily have the same power that a warranty deed has. Now, the biggest reason why that becomes a factor is because if you want to sell the property to somebody that's going to get financing to buy it, one of the requirements to get financing is going to be title insurance. And in many cases, you can't get title insurance on a standard tax deed, although even that is beginning to change. But in the past, you couldn't get title insurance on a tax deed. So what you would need to do if you want to do that is go through something called the quiet title action, and that's a process you can go through. You can basically pay an attorney to do it. It might cost you, it might cost, depending on the cost could vary. Maybe it's $1,000, and it takes a few months. But essentially, what they're doing is they're validating. The attorney is sending out different letters there to validate your claims, and at the end of that period, you're issued with a warranty deed on the property so that you can sell it any way you want. So, that's essentially how it works. That's kind of the quick elevator version of it here.
Yeah, and depending on your strategy, I mean, when you're foreclosing on a tax lien, you should at that point at least have a strategy in place. And so if that strategy is, like Shade mentioned, going through the quiet title process and getting a warranty deed on the property, then you would take that into consideration. If not, then you could always resell or wholesale the property to another investor. So maybe you were able to acquire the property for a portion of the property's value, and you end up, so let's say that you purchase it for 20% of its value and you sell it for 50%. Then at that point, that investor, whoever buys the property, will go ahead and go through the quiet title process or do whatever they want to it. So when you're, the key to this is that you're acquiring the property for a small portion of its actual value. So at that point, you could do anything. I mean, if you're acquiring a $50,000 or $60,000 or $100,000 home for $3,000 or $4,000 in delinquent taxes, that you are in the driver's seat. I mean, you really have the flexibility to decide: do you want to acquire do you want to go through foreclosure? Would you like to rent the property out? Would you like to sell the property? Would you like to wholesale it? And then at that point, you can go through whatever steps are needed. But if you're acquiring a good property for pennies on the dollar, you don't necessarily have to spend attorney cost if you plan on wholesaling the property.
Yeah, what they're looking at right now are just a couple of our most recent deals. If you want to go ahead and tell them that, after that I'll answer a couple more of the questions here we have.
Sure. These are just a couple of properties that we purchased over the last year in Florida. These are just tax deeds, and so each one of these properties that had tax and certificates issued on the property, the tax lien holders ended up foreclosing on those properties, and then they went up to the tax deed sale. At that point, that's where we bid it on these properties. And so here's two single-family homes that we purchased. The first one, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, has a value of about $62,000. We ended up getting it for about $10,000. This property would rent out for about $850, $900 a month. And so when you're looking at a $10,000 property and you rent it out for $850 a month, within 1 year's time, this property will essentially pay for itself. The property on the bottom is a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. It ended up having a value of about $74,000. We ended up spending a little bit more for this property. We ended up paying $20,000, and the rent value is $970. We're actually renting this property out currently for about $10.50 a month. So, in each one of these properties, it depends on the individual strategy. This first property we actually ended up selling, the one on the top, so that was one we actually ended up selling, but if we would have continued renting it out, that would have had a consistent income. So it kind of depends on your strategy. When it comes to tax deed investing, investors will invest to either earn some type of residual income, and if you're looking to earn residual income, then you could do that by renting it out, you could do that by lease option, you could do that by seller financing, where you're essentially making that property a cash flow property that's giving you residual income on a monthly basis. If you're looking to do lump sums, like for example the first property we ended up selling, and we're actually looking at possibly selling this second property as well, because we have people that are interested in it just by driving by the property. And so with each one of these properties, depending on your strategy, you could either turn around and flip it and make a lump sum cash, or you could rent that property out and essentially have the property pay for itself within 1 year or 2 years, or depending on how much you spend in the rental amount. But essentially, if in each one of these properties within a year and a half, through their rental income, the property would pay for itself. The biggest problem with rentals is the fact that you have a mortgage on the property. So if you're getting $1,000 in rent, you may be paying $800 in a mortgage. That only leaves you $200 a month for essential profit. And if you're not living within that area and you have to have a property management company handle the business for you, then that increases that amount even lower. But in these type of properties where you're paying cash up front and you're essentially owning the property, that property can pay itself off within a short period of time. And then, year 11 or month 11 or month 12 or month 13th or whatever it is, you're going to start receiving an income on that individual property. And even if you have a property management company, for example, the first property, $850 a month, maybe a property management takes $60 or $70 a month, but you don't have to handle the property at all, and now you have a monthly income of $750 or $800 or $1,000 or whatever it is coming into you every single month on an investment that's paid off, that's going up in value on a monthly basis. What makes it nice with this real estate bubble? I mean, the real estate bubble was a tragedy for most people. What makes it nice for us as investors is in most areas in the country the market has bottomed out. So it's already hit the lowest point, and so right now we're essentially going up in value. These properties are going up in value. Each one of these properties have gone up in value since we purchased it even a year ago by 5 or 6 or 7%. So not only are you earning a monthly income, but you're also increasing your net worth as that property goes up in value.
Yeah, and what Steve just shared is really the trick here. I think, probably the fastest way to make money. Consider this. Think about this. In your local area, what does a home rent out for? Okay, and what you'll find is that homes across the country, they rent out for right around $800 to $1,000 at least, and beyond that, it can get higher, it can get more expensive, but rent is something that is higher than well, I guess it's something. Rent is something that goes up on a regular basis. And now, compared to that amount and what rent is, how much would it cost to buy one of those properties in your local area? Where we're located at, if you wanted to create $1,000 a month in rent, you would probably have to spend $200,000 to $250,000 in order to get a home that you could do that with. Okay. Now, the real trick here is that these properties, they don't have the same high value, but they do have the same rent amount, that you can get. So like Steve said, you pay a fairly small amount for this property and suddenly it becomes a cash cow. it becomes, it's making money for you every single month. And not only is it making money from the rent, but it's also going up in value, so you're making money both ways. Now, one of the questions that we had was actually about how one can foreclose on a tax lien or a deed from out of state. They're wondering if you hire a real estate attorney in that state and ask to foreclose on your behalf. And actually, it's become much more simple than that. By the way, the tax deeds, they've essentially already been foreclosed on. So it's just a matter of buying them, and you can oftentimes do that through an online auction. So you don't necessarily have to be there in person. Now, we're not talking about buying sight unseen, because you do want to get some kind of evidence of that the property is still there. You don't need to know the exact value, but you want to make sure that that it is, the property is there and that it is worth investing in. And there are a couple of different ways you can have somebody from that area take a few pictures for you, which is what we did. But outside of that, you really don't have to be local anymore to do much. If you think about it, there's not really a whole lot that you actually would go down to your county building to do. Most of it can be done online, which is the same way that things work now. So if it was a lien and you wanted to initiate that process, start that process, every state's a little bit different, but you wouldn't necessarily have to be there locally in order to do it. When you have the lien, to do that process is something that's pretty normal and doesn't require an attorney.
Yeah, exactly. And to kind of piggyback what you're saying, Shade, I mean, with each one of these properties here, if we were to invest here local, let's say you live in California, where a 2-bedroom, 1-bath home is $500,000 or $600,000. For you to try to generate rental income within your own area, it's going to be a tough process. But for you to take that money, invest into another state, and you can hire, because of the income or the value that's there as far as the rental income, you're able to hire a property management company to handle all the business for you. So instead of investing $500,000 into one property that you may make $1,500 a month in rental income, you can invest that $500,000 or whatever that amount would be, I'm just using that as an example, into 15 or 20 tax deed properties in somewhere like Florida that have a high rental income. So what makes Florida nice is the rental value is high and the property value is a little lower. And so depending on your market, it may be beneficial for you not to invest within your own state. I mean, we've talked to so many investors over the years that I'm terrified of investing outside my own area. Well, with the internet now, that makes it so much possible, and it may be financially beneficial for you to invest outside your own state.
Yeah, also just to emphasize, there's a stigma, associated with renting, and that is people think, I don't want to be a landlord. I live out of state. What the heck can I do? And most of that really is based on what Steve mentioned before, and that is somebody that still has a mortgage on that property, or they owe a lot of money on that property, and that's a constant stress to them because they have to collect money every single month or they're losing money, essentially. And so they really can't afford to hire a property management company there, or if they do, it ends up costing them money. With this, everything changes about the investment if you pay $20,000 for it or $10,000 for it and you own it outright rather than needing to get some kind of a big loan on it. At that point, everything becomes profit. So hiring out a property management company to handle everything for you, as far as keeping the place occupied and rented, bringing in money, that's a small price to pay, for that monthly check that you're going to receive for that. And basically, it's a plug and play operation. You turn it over to them and you just sit back and collect the money until you decide you want to do something with the property. Like Steve said before, there are other options for selling them, like owner financing. As time goes on, more and more people are going to need alternative forms of financing. And if you own the property outright and you've only paid $10,000 for it, then you could quite easily work out a deal with owner financing to where you can basically become the bank. So you have the individual put $10,000 down, and maybe they have, they're buying it for whatever price you set, and they have a set mortgage. And what happens is you're still the deed holder on that property until they pay it off. So what happens if they default? you just take it back. You're never really in any risk of losing it, which is the same position that the banks are in. So you can really do this quite well and come out way ahead.
Yeah, and this is really quite on the topic, but I want to bring it up anyway. We just posted a story on our Facebook and Twitter page today about a tax lien investor from Iowa that buys tax liens all across the country and actually ended up, owning a property that ended up essentially purchasing a property for a homeless family, and was able for a few $1,000s be able to provide a homeless family with an incredible property just because they had been so profitable through their tax sale investing. And so, when you're acquiring a property for $3,000 or $4,000, there's so many options, or $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever that is. There's so many options that you can do for it. And if you want to give back, this was something that this investor did, and was pretty incredible. But he gave back this property to this homeless family that needed a property, and really was able to completely change their life. And so, when you're starting, obviously you're trying to earn income for yourself, but as you continue to build that up, if there's other avenues like this investor did, those are going to be options to you because you acquired the property. I mean, he acquired the property for $3,000 or $4,000, so he was giving her a home that he spent $3,000 or $4,000 versus spending $50,000 or $100,000, and was able to completely change this family's life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, and by the way, we're gonna in a minute we'll see if we can look at some of the different examples out there. But I think you'll be blown away by the types of opportunities that are out there. I mean, it's like any other investment. Some places might be competitive, some places not so much. But we go through a lot of tax sales, and so we see results all the time that blow us away. There are some tremendous opportunities. So, if you're looking at this, which investment strategy is best for you? Because I think the first step in getting started here is figuring out exactly where you want to go. This is one of the problems that people have constantly run into that we've talked with is they like tax sales, but they haven't really defined exactly what it is that they're after, and that creates a lot of confusion related to the investment. So the question you really have to ask yourself here is, which one of these are you after? Which one is it that you want? Are you after property acquisition, or are you after a high interest rate return on a very safe investment? That decision will ultimately determine what type of investment you go after. Now, on the right side here with tax liens and a high interest rate return, like we said, that will eventually lead to some properties because of the nature of how liens work. But this isn't the primary reason for doing it. For example, I mentioned earlier that banks and financial institutions have been buying liens for decades, and quite literally, they would spend hundreds of millions of dollars in some of these tax sales. One bank alone would spend $300 million at a tax sale, and basically what they have the power to do, which is a little bit different from you, is they can approach these counties and offer to buy up all of their liens, if they want. They have the ability to buy in bulk. But the reason why they buy all these up is because they know they're such a great investment. They know they're going to earn that high interest rate return, and so they just buy them all and sit back and wait for them, to be paid off. And they've been able to do that for a long time. They've been able to do that for a long time and earn a high interest rate return. So once you've identified, which one it is that you're after. In fact, when we work with members, we actually have a number of different profiles. We've got like a profile system where people can read through several different methods, that they could utilize to invest, and they kind of pick one, and that that gives them their strategy and helps them figure out where to begin. But the buying methods, the primary buying methods here, if you want, Steve, go ahead and cover them.
Yeah, to kind of break it down simply, I mean, with our investor profiles, we're going to have specific profiles that will Yeah, for example, maybe you're an online tax deed investor. Well, there's certain states where you're able to do that and utilize that profile. But if we're to kind of break it down, there's really four ways to buy tax liens or tax deeds: either through an online auction, a live over the counter, or the secondary market. And so with an online auction, that's something that's changed. I mean, when me and Shade first got started, I attended my first tax sale in 1999. Online auctions were a thing of the future. You received the list that you got out of the newspaper. You used that newspaper list to go down to the county courthouse to research those individual properties, and then you bid it there at the live auction. Now, every state in the country still has live auctions, so even states that have moved to online auctions like Florida or New Jersey or Arizona are still going to have states that are counties that do live auctions. And so attending a live auction is exactly what that means. It means you're going down to the county office building, if that's the county courthouse steps, or if that's within some type of conference room or something like that within the county building, and you're going to be bidding on those individual properties there at the auction, if that's a tax lien or tax deed. With online auctions, of course, that gives us the ability to participate online. And so many different states have moved toward an online auction system, and counties within that states. There's so many different types, be that redemption deeds, tax liens, tax deeds, that come up for online auction. In fact, on our members website, on the online auction tab, or we're going to have auctions that are coming up this month in New Jersey and Colorado and South Carolina that are available to be purchased online. Then, of course, over-the-counter or tax liens or tax deeds that were offered at number 1 and number 2 at either an online auction or a live auction and weren't purchased at the event or weren't purchased at the auction. So these are the properties or tax liens or tax deeds that are available directly from the county. Now, what makes over-the-counter tax lien investing so lucrative is that when you're looking at an over-the-counter tax lien, you're getting that tax lien at the highest interest rate. So like Shade mentioned before, you're not going to be bidding down the interest rate from 18% to 17.75 to 17.50 or whatever it is. If it's in Arizona, you're looking at a 16% interest rate. If you're looking in Florida, you're talking about an 18% interest rate. And so as you go through and look at the list of over-the-counter tax liens or tax deeds, and tax deeds is the same way, you're not going to be bidding up the price. When one of these properties comes for tax deed auction, for example, the two properties that we showed you, those properties represent probably 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 properties that I bid on before we were able to acquire those properties. So, with over-the-counter, you're not going to be bidding up the price. You're not going to be bidding down the interest. And with the secondary market, that's something that's really pretty unique.
Yeah, I think it's the most exciting thing that we've seen in a long time with tax liens. Something totally new that really wasn't even available a few years back.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where these banks and hedge funds that have been investing in tax and certificates for years, where investors are able to go in with the help of us or with one of these other providers to actually purchase these secondary tax liens. So these are tax liens that were purchased by the bank, and what the bank, if it's Wells Fargo or whoever it is, maybe it's a hedge fund, what most of these companies do is they're only looking for the interest rate. They don't have people or strategies or in place to foreclose on these tax liens. And so with the secondary market, what essentially is happening is we're going to these banks that have tax and certificates. So maybe they have, a $10 million portfolio of tax and certificates, and out of that $10 million portfolio, maybe there's $500,000 or $1 million worth of tax liens that have gone through the entire redemption period and haven't redeemed. So these are tax liens that are foreclosure ready. So as investors, we can go ahead and purchase these tax lien certificates, start the foreclosure process now, and get our money back within 6 months to a year. So what that gives us the ability to do is constantly take the money that we purchase those tax lien certificates and then reinvest them into additional tax liens. In addition, with the secondary market, depending on the tax liens that you purchased, for example, sometimes Class A tax liens, may not have as much of a discount, but depending on how much money you have to invest in the secondary market, many times you can get a discount on those tax liens as well. So if you buy a $20,000 portfolio of tax lien certificates, you may be able to get those tax liens at a slight discount. So maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% lower, where you already met just by investing in those tax liens before you've even started the foreclosure process or anything like that, you've already made a return on your investment.
I think one of the coolest parts about the secondary market is how simple it is for people to do it. You don't have to do all of the research. I mean, essentially, the tax liens have already been researched, they've already been purchased, and all you basically have to decide is how big of a portfolio you want, what exactly you want to buy, and your portfolio manager, which we've got one that we work with directly here, named Mark, but essentially he can look through the portfolio and find the best tax liens to present to you, and so it saves a lot of time, and it still offers that that great high interest rate return, and it's something that will happen faster. I mean, it is kind of crazy to think that these banks will buy all these liens and they'll just sit and wait, and the redemption period comes and goes, but they have no interest, absolutely no interest in land, or property. They don't want to own anything. They just want to earn high interest rate returns, and so they just kind of sit there and wait, and it creates this tremendous opportunity for investors, because it means that you can step into that position and begin the foreclosure process immediately. And once you start the foreclosure process, the lien will have some kind of resolution within a short time period. Something has to happen. Either the property's foreclosed on or it's paid off. But for people that don't have a ton of time, or maybe they understand tax liens, but they don't have the expertise, or maybe they're not comfortable doing it, it's a really good option and a way that people can invest and earn a good rate of return on a really safe investment.
Yeah, and one thing to talk about quickly with the secondary tax liens is when you're looking at the secondary market right now, generally you're going to need about $5,000 to make an offer to one of these banks. Now we're looking at possibly for our members in the future where we actually go out and purchase secondary tax liens and make them available on our website as well for people that have less than $5,000. But usually when you're making an offer to these banks or to these institutions, they're generally going to want a certain amount, and we've kind of determined that to be about around $5,000, where you can submit an offer to one of these individual banks. And so, the way that we go about offering secondary liens is completely different than what's available out there, because we're actually going to these individuals that we've created relationships with over the years and making an offer on a specific batch of tax lien certificates. And so right now, with the secondary market, generally you're going to need $4,000 or $5,000 to get started. In the future, we hope to make that available to an investor that maybe only has $500,000 to get started.
Yeah. Now, membership to our website. Our website is taxsalesupport.com. That's the training website that we have. It includes all the things that you see there. But we're pretty close to being able to wrap up the webinar. What we wanted to do, though, is you're able to sign up here for just $29.95 a month. But we want to be able to do something for everybody that's here tonight.